microaggressed you in a way, and thus everything is justified. And so I'm offended now becomes the trump card. Right? My subjective feeling of offense trumps anything that you were saying. It doesn't matter that what you were saying is true. Right? Facts don't care about your feelings, but we're all supposed to care about your feelings more than we care about the facts. And so if I'm microaggressed, a certain privilege attaches to victimhood. Self-appointed victimhood, not even real victimhood. You call yourself a victim. You call yourself microaggressed, and all of a sudden everybody is supposed to collapse in front of you and beg you for forgiveness. And in order to avoid these microaggressions, we create trigger warnings, right? These idiotic trigger warnings. And you know, I promise you that the people who have actually faced down triggers in the field are the last people who would be advocates of the trigger warning nonsense that is pushed on college campuses. Okay, you don't need a trigger warning to watch a movie just because you once heard about somebody who was raped. Okay, you don't need a trigger warning to talk about race just because you might be offended. Welcome to America, where people get to say what they want. People acquire fears, by the way, based on these trigger warnings. If you keep telling people that they ought to be afraid, if you keep saying you ought to be afraid, you ought to be afraid, here's a trigger warning, you ought to be afraid, eventually people start to internalize this, and then they start to be triggered, and then they have a feeling of microaggression. It's all a reinforcing cycle. Now, the beautiful thing about microaggressions is it doesn't just give you an unearned moral superiority over everyone based on your own sense of victimhood. The beautiful thing about microaggressions is the term itself, right? Because they're not micro-insults, right? They're not micro-offensive statements. They're microaggressions. The idea being that you have now been aggressed upon, that somebody has done something aggressive to you. And for those of us who live in the real world, the way that aggression is usually met is with aggression. Right? If somebody punches you in the face, you punch them back in the face. Right? But what the term microaggression does is it now violates the cardinal rule from kindergarten: sticks and stones may break my bones, but words will never hurt me. The idea being that words will hurt me, and now I can break your bones with sticks and stones. Because words are microaggressive. I have been aggressed upon. Right? It was an act of aggression, it hurt me, and now I get to turn around and do something to you like call the guys with the guns. And microaggressions become an excuse for violence and racism, and yes, evil. It's amazing. In American life, we've become fond of our myth of what evil looks like. We've become fond of the kind of James Bond myth of what evil is, where evil has now become basically, you know, the guy who is the guy who is at the end of the shadowy table in the James Bond film, and he has a shark tank that is under the floor, and if he doesn't like you, he hits a button, and then he laughs hysterically. But first he tells you his evil plan so you can escape and kill him later, right? This is what evil is. Evil is this myth of pure evil. It's just people who enjoy doing evil. Good people, normal people could never turn evil. This is all a myth. It's not true. Okay, there are actual ways that evil is created, and one of the ways that evil is created is through the microaggression culture. Another way that the evil is created is through unjustified self-esteem that is promoted by the left on university campuses, and another way is an ideology of victimhood that results in actual suffering. Okay, this is not coming from me. This is coming from a book called Evil, Inside Human Violence and Cruelty by a Columbia psychologist named Roy Baumeister. But he says that ideology clearly can be a force for evil, because if you believe that the ends justify the means, you're pretty much willing to do anything. Right? If you are a Nazi, then you believe that killing Jews gets you to Nazi utopia, so you're basically willing to do anything. Well, if you're somebody who believes that the way that racial justice is done in the country is by getting innocent people fired, you are willing to get innocent people fired in order to pursue racial justice. Ideology trumps decency. Unjustified self-esteem is another way that evil is created. What social psychologists have found, what psychologists have found is that people who are violent and do evil things, they're not doing so because of lack of self-esteem. This is nonsense. It's just not true. Most people who do evil things, most violent people, are people with very high self-esteem, and then who find that their high self-esteem doesn't match up to the reality of the world. And this creates what Baumeister calls ego threats. Ego threats are this gap between how you perceive yourself and what you actually are. And if you spend a lot of time thinking that you are great, and then people tell you that you're not great, then you are likely to respond in a violent way. So all colleges do now is tell kids that they're great. All colleges do is tell kids that they're the future. If that's the case, I'll sell my bonds. All they do is tell kids that they are the ones who are going to be running the world, and they're all brilliant, and they're all precious little snowflakes who have to be guarded in their little safe spaces. And if we do that, if we keep them under glass like David Duchovny's hand in Zoolander, then somehow we will come up with a better world. We will have created a better world. What instead happens is that these kids graduate from college, these people not much younger than I am graduate from college, and they go out and they sit at Occupy protests and they poop on themselves and complain about why their lesbian arts degree isn't getting them a six-figure job on Wall Street. And this ends with aggressiveness, and this ends with nastiness, and this ends with bad behavior, which is exactly what Occupy Wall Street ended in. I mean, people were raping each other at Occupy Wall Street protests. People were engaging in acts of violence at Occupy Wall Street protests. And finally, the microaggression mentality. The microaggression mentality. You know, when you think of a spousal abuser, for example, they say the difference between a normal husband and a spousal abuser is that if I'm in the car with my wife, and my wife says to me, that restaurant, it looks too expensive, we shouldn't go there. Then a normal person goes, okay, that restaurant's probably too expensive, we shouldn't go there. The spousal abuser, he says, that's an implicit critique of my earning ability as a man, she deserves a smack in the jaw. Right? That's the microaggression culture at work. I feel offended, even if there was no offense that was meant, and therefore I can act out in aggressive ways. Microaggression culture actually creates violence, it creates bad behavior because people now feel justified in their bad behavior. There's never been a bad person on planet Earth who has not felt justified in doing his or her bad thing. And all colleges do now is give people reasons to feel like they are justified in doing the bad things that they want to do. Because once you've been microaggressed, once you're part of the self-designated victim group, driven to extremes by the evils of white privilege, you can now ban white students from black safe spaces, right? You can ban them, which, by the way, is a policy the KKK loves because the space is both separate and equal, right? You can call the cops. You can call the cops. You can have the police investigate hateful remarks, as the notice went out from MU a couple of weeks ago. It was heavily covered. I tweeted out that everybody should immediately call the cops and inform them that Professor Melissa Click was engaged in microaggressions against people and actual aggressions against people. You can ban reporters from public spaces by calling for muscle. By the way, why Melissa Click is still employed at this university is absolutely beyond me. There is no way in hell anybody should be paying her salary. Once you're microaggressed, you can deliberately assault reporters, as we saw happen to at least a couple of reporters. And again, I have to tell you, the strategy that these protesters are using, this constant you hit yourself strategy, and if you watch the tape of the reporter who was trying to get into the safe space, the magical safe space, the coveted utopian safe space, he's standing there with the camera, and all of the kids are saying to each other, and one of the professors is saying to them, you know, just move up, just move, let's march forward. And the reporter's literally just standing there. They bump into the reporter with him standing there completely immobile, and then they start yelling at him about how he hit them. And it's just childish behavior. This is spoiled brat behavior. You can excuse pastors being punched inside the free speech zone, right? You can do anything. Once you've been microaggressed, microaggression gives you superpowers. And the beauty of it is that you give yourself the superpowers because you're the one who determines whether you've been microaggressed. You don't even have to show proof that you were microaggressed. You were because you feel it deep in the cockles of your heart. So finally, all of this, the white privilege, the microaggressions, this provides the impetus for the safe space. The vaunted safe space, which I know I have violated multiple times tonight. And I gotta tell you, I don't give two hoots in hell. The system is so corrupt, it's so inescapable, and you've made it so corrupt and so inescapable to yourself that when you need a safe space, everybody needs to be put outside the safe space, and reality must not intrude. The South Park song about safe spaces is exactly what these people think. And let me tell you something about safe spaces. There's only one group of people who want safe spaces that are race-specific. There's only one group of people that want safe spaces so that they never have to hear from anybody of a different ideology or political persuasion. Those people are called fascists. Okay, and you've got a bunch of fascists, damn fascists on this campus, who are trying to shut down political debate and trying to cloister themselves in this little cocoon of stupidity so they don't have to debate anyone or think about issues outside their kin so that they can feel comfortable. Guess what? Life isn't about feeling comfortable. Life is about bettering yourself. Get off your ass, you stupid pansies. Every fascist in the history of the world has his safe space. Every fascist has his safe space. It's terrible for you. It's terrible for this university. It's terrible for the country. Grow the hell up. You're in a safe space, thank God. It's called America. Learn to appreciate it or get out. I'm happy to take questions. Thanks so much. Don't all rush forward at once. Yeah. It can be about anything. It doesn't have to be about me ranting at people. if by open forum it means you get to make a speech, the answer is no. There has to be a question mark at the end.
Yeah, just a question. So, a lot of these social justice circles, a lot of them lie on the left of the aisle, in these social justice causes. But in a lot of these really super liberal countries in Europe, such as like Sweden, France, Belgium, you see a lot of covering for a lot of more problematic and radicalized beliefs in Islam, like such as like.
No, I read you. Okay.
And this kind of goes back to the video you made about a year ago about the myth of the tiny radical
Muslim. Yeah, the tiny radical Muslim minority. Yeah.
So why do you think that liberals are so quick to sort of judge imagined racism in white people and white Americans, yet they seem to cover for it in Islam?
Yes, this is a good question. It is a good question. So the question is for people who, I mean, we have a mic, so I assume everybody heard it, but the basic question was, why is it that the left seems so comfortable siding with radical Islam in so many situations around the world? And the answer is because leftist philosophy is based on the philosophy of the oppressed versus the oppressor. Right? The way that the left judges the world is based on equality of outcome. All that matters is that everybody ends up equal. It doesn't matter equal opportunity. Leftism is based on the fundamental premise that everybody should end up the same. So if there are two guys in a room, one guy has $4 and one guy has $1, the guy with 4 must have exploited the guy with 1. Or if there's a homeless guy and Bill Gates must have exploited the homeless guy somehow, even if the homeless guy can't afford a crappy version of Windows. Right? He must have exploited him. Well, the same holds true internationally. So if you look internationally, Islamic countries tend to be incredibly poor because they're badly run and because they're oppressive and because they're tyrannical. And because all of that is true, these countries do not do well on the international stage. The left, however, just sees impoverished country, super wealthy America, super wealthy West. Western civilization must have made them poor through colonialism and imperialism. Therefore, we owe some sort of blood guilt on this, and so we have to be warm toward what are essentially philosophies of people who are impoverished. So the left believes that ideology, religious ideology, is basically just a sheer cover on poverty. Right? The only reason that radical Muslims are radical is not because of radical Islam. They're radical Muslims because they are poor. And so if we could just rectify that situation, everything would be hunky-dory. That's why they're so warm. They side with the oppressed versus the oppressor, and the oppressed are always the people who are poor, even if the oppressed are actually the oppressors and killing people.
The best way for those of us who dissent against the views and methodology of the concerned student movement to try and combat this change that's occurring in our student body and just campuses across America?
Well, I think that the most potent thing that concerned students have done is they've pushed a language that we have refused to fight. So that they say things, they spout tautologies like racism exists. I agree. That was one of my fundamental premises at the beginning, right? Racism on an individual level definitely exists, of course. You'd be a fool to deny it. And then they say, okay, well, because there are individuals who are racist, everything is racist. You have to reject the logic. You have to call on them to show evidence. And you need some people with backbone. I mean, really, this is we now live in a country where the ultimate argument ender is you're a racist, right? This is basically how everybody is silenced. Tim Wolf is a racist. He's a racist. How do we know he's a racist? Because he's a white guy, which is racist. Right? It is, by the way, it is totally incredible to me that Tim Wolf is supposed to be this great beneficiary of white privilege. But your football coach, who gets paid $3.1 million a year, and is a white guy, right? He's not a beneficiary of white privilege because he sides with concerned student 1950, right? He's a good guy, so he's not a white privilege guy, or at least he recognizes his white privilege. But Tim Wolf has to lose his job, right? So the answer is that the sophistry of the left has no impact unless you internalize it. If you just refuse to accept the narrative that they are pushing, there's nothing they can do to you. What would have happened at this university if Tim Wolf had looked at Jonathan Butler and said, okay, so what? Right, really, what would have happened? What would have happened if he had said to Jonathan Butler, you stepped into my car, right? If he said to Jonathan Butler, every racist incident that was reported to the police was fully investigated as appropriate under local, state, and federal law, which is true. Okay, if he had said that and Jonathan Butler had kept hunger striking, do I think Jonathan Butler was going to die for his beliefs? I think mommy and daddy, who are worth $20 million, would probably have bought him a popsicle.
I'm with the Mizzou CRs. I'm doing questions online, so these are going to be from Twitter. So David R. Shorten at D. Shorten Music wants to know, in the ideological war between left and right, what are the strongest weapons on both sides?
Well, the strongest weapon for the left is always character attacks, right? You're a racist, sexist, bigot, homophobe. It's actually the only argument that they have, generally speaking. They disagree with you, therefore you're a bad person. Right? This is what basically Barack Obama said this with regard to anybody who objects to his Syrian refugee idea, right? You're a bad person, you hate children, you hate women, you fear widows, right? You're a bad person. We can't actually have a logical discussion about the issue. You're just a bad person. That's the strongest argument on the left side. The strongest argument on the right side, presumably, which is why I'm on the right, is evidence and logic. The problem is that in an argument, evidence and logic actually tend to lose to character assault. Character assault tends to win. Because once you've been labeled a racist, no one wants to hear your evidence and your argument. And so, as I have frequently said, the biggest mistake that people on the right make is that when they are called a racist, sexist, bigot, homophobe, they then proceed to try and have a normal conversation with the person who labeled them this. Right? The proper answer to "you're a racist" is not, you know what, let's have a discussion about race in America. The proper answer to "you're a racist" is, no, you're an a-hole. Because for somebody to call you a racist without evidence is an a-hole thing to do. Right? You are not supposed to just drop character charges on people without any evidence of any sort. You're supposed to be able to back it up. So the right needs to start using that argument. It's effective, I know from personal experience, and it is a useful tool, because until we can get to the point where the left and the right actually have discussions about policy and not about character, nothing is going to happen that's good in American politics.
Of this university, I don't really have a question for you because I agree with most of what you say. I just wanted to say thank you for coming and helping us fight the fight here.
Oh, I appreciate it. Thank you, sir. Thank everybody for showing up, honestly, and being willing to stand up in the face of overwhelming media jackassery. Because I'm a frequent watcher of ESPN, which has now become basically MSNBC with footballs. I was driving around campus today and not seeing bodies in the streets of poor black children, and not seeing the Ku Klux Klan on campus riding their white stallions, and not seeing Bull Connor anywhere with a hose. I was kind of surprised, because if you had watched the media coverage from outside this particular space, the impression that you got is that racism is endemic to the university. It is everywhere. The cowardly administration that refuses to defend the university or itself backed into this by basically saying that, yes, we're racist, yes, mea culpa, maxima culpa, right? We must be racist, now please leave us alone, and then cowering in a corner like scared little girls. If that were the impression that you got from the university, that's because of the media. So thank you for coming out today, because this is, honestly, I think this is the first time that the Mizzou community has shown that not everybody agrees with this nonsense, fascistic, tyrannical movement that's being pushed by the left. Give yourselves a hand, honestly.
Hi, I'm Josh Ferry. I have a lot of questions for you, so if you want to come over for Shabbat dinner.
Oh, I appreciate it, thank you.
So, as a Jew, I've obviously experienced, racism from time to time. I mean, unless somebody had a really bad day at dining hall, that hoop swastika was meant for people. So, for somebody like me who obviously sometimes agrees with what's happening on campus, not in the sense of how it's being taken care of, but at the fact that, yes, I agree, like you said, there is racism here and there.
Sure.
So, as somebody who believes that, and who strongly supports Israel and its right to exist and stuff like that, how do you suggest dealing with activists like on campus, these Black Lives Matter groups and other groups, aligning themselves with like BDS movements and boycotting Israel movements, where when I sometimes agree with them, but when they do that, I'm like, whoa.
Well, I mean, I want more specifics on where you agree with them, but but as far as the alliance between all of these various ethnic groups that are kind of getting together and then backing each other's play in order to tear down the system, I mean, there's a reason. It's an alliance. They're using. I mean, this actually has deep roots in certain leftist philosophy. There's a school of thought called the Frankfurt School. It's a Marxist school of thought that came to the United States in the 1920s and 1930s. They were expatriates from Germany, and they had realized that the Marxist description of the world, that the oppressed classes, that the poor of the world, the proletariat, were going to rise up and take over the universe. All this was not true in the aftermath of World War I. And so they had to come up with a different strategy for how to make this happen. And one of the things that they suggested was polarize people along tribal lines, along racial lines, and then have everybody sort of attack the capitalist system as the source of all racism. And so you're seeing that alliance in action right now. I mean, that's really what you're seeing, because for goodness sake, I mean, forget the Black Lives Matter movement for a second. Think about the bizarre juxtaposition between the boycott, divest, sanctions movement against Israel and the LGBT crowd. Right? I mean, talk about something that makes no sense whatsoever, right? I mean, they literally kill gay people in certain parts of the Middle East, and there's actual legal punishment for homosexuality under the Palestinian Authority. But yet, the LGBT crowd will side with the anti-Israel crowd. That's because there's a broader agenda, not because they agree on every particular. The only way to fight that is by calling it out when you see it, and not caving to this generalized idea that America is a terrible, oppressive, terrible place. Honestly, the people at this university, we are privileged to live at such a time in history. You know, for all the problems that I have with the current administration, and for all the problems I have with the American left and the international left, and for all the skepticism I have about the future, this is, if you could live in any time of history, it would be right now. I mean, living right now is a magnificent thing, and living in America right now is the best any group of human beings has ever had it in the history of the world. And so having people rip down the system that built all of that, saying, oh yeah, we'll make things better by taking away all of the fundamental notions of freedom and liberty that undergird that truly is an evil goal.
My name is Victoria. I'm a freshman journalism student here. I actually have 2 questions for you. I'm in a class right now where our entire grade is based off of papers we have to write, specifically dealing with issues like how white privilege has affected marginalized groups of people over, like, throughout history. Yes, something specific like that. It's not the journalism class, but how would you suggest, like, somebody, like, for me, for example, who believes that, you know, it's kind of bullshit, is when in the face that my entire grade is based off of doing something like this. And also, I saw you on the Dr. Drew show a few months ago when Zoe Tur put their hand on the back of your neck, and I wanted to know what happened with that.
Yeah. No, you don't have to get in trouble. I'll do it. The first answer as to should you sacrifice your grades in order to write correct things on your test, the answer is no. Don't sacrifice your grades. If you were to dig up my blue books from UCLA 15 years ago, you would find that I wrote like Lenin, because in class I would speak up, but then all of the tests were anonymous. I never suggest to any student that they sacrifice their grades and their academic future on the altar of doing the right thing, because you're not going to get any points for it. Nobody's going to know about it, and these teachers, the intolerant ones, do have your grades in their hands, and to a certain extent your future in their hands. As far as the Zoe Tur incident, for people who didn't see this and don't know what she's referring to, it's kind of a fun story, so I'll tell it. Story time with Ben Shapiro. So about 3 months ago, you can find this online. Go to YouTube. It was a very big story at the time. It was like the #1 trending topic on Facebook and Twitter. I was invited to go on CNN Headline News on the Dr. Drew show. And I was invited to talk about how was Caitlyn Jenner a hero or not? This is when ESPN was giving Caitlyn Jenner the Hero Award. You know, rather than soldiers who had had limbs blown off and continued their athletic careers, right? No, Caitlyn Jenner was a hero for being an extraordinarily wealthy white man with a mental disorder. And so they knew my opinion on this, obviously. I'd written about it. I'd spoken about it. And my belief, there's something I like, and it's called science. And science suggests that if you have not a single cell in your body without a Y chromosome, except for your sperm cells, and if you still have all your appendages, and if you still have your twig and berries and all the rest of it, but you call yourself a woman, no. No, and this goes back to my feeling that your subjective view of yourself is completely irrelevant to me. I don't care what you think you are, I just care what you are. And so, you know, they knew what I was going to say. I made this very clear. The producer of the Dr. Drew show, who happens to be a former producer, he told me, on Jerry Springer, decided that it would be a wise idea to have on, to debate me, a guy by the name of Zoe Tur, who is a transgender woman, is a post-op transgender woman, and is a he, because he is still a he. You can lose the parts and you are still a man. Okay, so they decide to seat the two of us next to each other. And so we're seated next to each other, and this debate starts, and everybody's talking about, is Caitlyn Jenner a hero, or is Caitlyn Jenner not a hero? And finally they come to me, and I said, I don't understand why we are engaging in mass delusion. Right? Well, why are we doing the Emperor's New Clothes bit? All right, we all know Caitlyn Jenner's a man, and we're sitting here pretending Caitlyn Jenner's a woman. And at one point I said to one of the guys on the panel, would you date Caitlyn Jenner? Right, you're a straight guy, would you date Caitlyn Jenner? And the answer, of course, is no, because Caitlyn Jenner still has a penis. Okay? It's the most feminine penis you've ever seen. And it's... And so, you know, I say this, and microaggressions everywhere. And just as I say, microaggressions lead to actual aggression. So what happened is I said this, and this transgender guy sitting next to me, he grabs me by the back of the neck on national TV and says, if you don't cut that out, you'll go home in an ambulance, or I'll send you home in an ambulance, which is weird because ambulances don't go home. And so I was taken aback slightly, To have this guy who was what precipitated it is there was a point where he had said, "You don't understand genetics," and I said, "What are your genetics, sir?" And it was the sir that got to him. And so in a voice at least 2 octaves lower than mine, he growled at me, you know, "I'll send you home in an ambulance." And what was amazing about the experience was that everybody on the panel, universally on the panel, everybody turned on me after a threat of physical violence and an actual legal battery on national television. They turned on me. You knew that was going to be offensive, didn't you? You knew that was going to be offensive. To which I said, "I don't care." Right? That's not, my job is not to be inoffensive. My job is to tell the truth. I mean, you had me on this program to say exactly this. Well, the outcome of this is that I went and did what really mostly to make the point that you're not supposed to be able to get away with this stuff. I went and I filed a police report for battery. And I did so because during the break, Zoe turned to me and said, "I'll see you in the parking lot." They'd send security out to the outdoors with me. They'd send him to my car. He was threatening me on Twitter, saying he would curb stomp me, etc. Which I have to say is deeply unladylike behavior. And so the end result was that it goes from the police to the DA. It finally gets to the DA, and the DA says that we can't. This fact pattern we can't do. I mean, it's on video, but this fact pattern we can't do anything because the person who assaulted you, essentially, the person who committed battery upon you, is a member of a victimized minority. Essentially, there is